Welcome, everyone. This is a platform where we discuss issues of public interest and strengthen civic consciousness and encourage citizens to play active role in building our democracy. Today, we focus on the recently concluded Ekiti state governorship election and the important question it raises about the future of elections in Nigeria. The election was generally described as peaceful, with security personnel maintaining order and voters in many communities able to cast their ballot without disruption. However, post-election observers by the Nigeria Civil Society Situation Room have highlighted concerns that go beyond the absence of violence. The Situation Room also reported instances of beavers malfunction and delayed activation in some polling units, particularly affecting elderly voters during facial recognition processes. Well, to help us unpack these and more, the conversation for this morning, I'm joined by Agiampe Onyema. She's the program manager for elections and civics at the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, PLAC. You're welcome to our studio if your first time here, right?
Yes, it is, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. You're welcome to the program. So let's begin from the reports received by the Situation Room and your own observation. How would you assess the overall conduct of the Ekiti governorship elections?
So, first of all, let me just say that overall, it was some mixed reactions. So we had some good things about the Ekiti elections, and I'll start with that because I think it was quite commendable that INEC had deployed staff and material as early as 7 a.m. So in very many polling units where we received reports from, by 7:30, 8 o'clock, materials had arrived. INEC staff were there. Unfortunately, there were a few that didn't happen, but most of them, and we had like a 92% average of early arrival of materials. Of course, you know, when that happens, this means that elections will start on time, and so elections commenced early at 8:30. So that's the very good side of these elections.
Okay.
The side that wasn't too good was, of course, vote buying, which this time around wasn't terribly blatant, but it was going on in a systemic way. It seems people have found a way to be able to, you know, do their vote buying and go to the corner to collect their money. And of course, security agencies who over time people have cautioned and called out just didn't bother to do anything. Everyone was just standing in their own corner, and all of this was going on. So we think that we can't keep going this way. You know, on the eve of the election, there was a video going around of people throwing bread at citizens who were collecting it. So in a way, most of these things go on long before the elections, and it would be good to just allow election day go without any form of this vote buying.
Okay. The election has largely been described as peaceful. Is a peaceful election necessarily a credible election, or should Nigerians look beyond the absence of violence?
So a peaceful election is good. It contributes to a credible election, but it's not peaceful equals credible. So there are so many factors that will make it much better. For instance, participation unhindered, which means that it doesn't have to only be violence. It could be that the machines didn't work well enough for people to even cast their votes, and they get frustrated and go away. So all of these things contribute to making the environment credible. And to be fair, the beavers not working in many places did not totally mar people from casting their votes. These are isolated cases, but I mean, it was good to point it out because it also happened in the FCT elections, area council elections that happened in February, and this did not happen in Anambra that was just last year. And so if there is an issue with the technology, we highlight these things so that we begin to work on them and things like that. So in cases where they worked really well because people also came out early. So voting, proceeded as normal in many places. And then we started getting these reports of delays. Rack techs who are deployed by INEC were available in some places. In some places they were not. So it was just something that why are we getting many of these reports about the beavers? In the end, we'll say credible elections is the totality of several factors that contribute. Again, when people come to cast their votes, are they casting their votes because they really want this person?
That's another conversation.
Exactly.
Okay, so one of the major concerns from the election is the low turnout. Why do you think there was such low turnout, regardless of a lot of people actually having their voter cards?
Yeah, so the percentage that we looked at, about 37, if you look at the total number of collected PVCs, which was 1,200,000 and something, and INEC had already recorded a 97.1 collection rate. So when you look at this, yes, you will highlight that 1/3 of the citizens came out to vote. And to be honest, this has been a worrying trend in off-cycle elections. If you look at Anambra, it was 21% on the average, and then the FCT as well. So I don't know, there could be several reasons why that voter apathy exists in off-cycle elections. It could be that people are disillusioned with governance or governance outcomes. It could just also be that many people don't feel motivated enough to leave their various locations around Nigeria to fly into the states just to vote for the governorship. So there are several factors.
Could it also be security reasons?
It could be security reasons and the fear of it, because even for us just going to Ekiti State, I know how many people called me to say, what are you people doing in the southwest? Are you not worried? But I just want to say that I don't think in the city centers anything could raise an alarm, because even driving from Akure, I drove from Akure into Ekiti, there was large police presence.
You're a strong woman.
So I also think that if we are serious enough to want to contribute to who is governor of our state, regardless of many of these things, if you're from somewhere, you want things to work for you, then you should contribute to making the process successful.
So what implication does declining voter participation have for the legitimacy of elected leaders and the strength of our democracy?
It plays a very critical role for legitimacy, because if only a certain percentage of people vote for our leaders, that doesn't cover a huge amount of people. Same thing with the general elections. It just shows that a certain percentage, a small percentage, are the ones electing our leaders. And then at the end of the day, these leaders actually work for all of us. And we are here in Nigeria, we see how people complain every day, but the difference of coming out to cast your vote for who you want is a huge thing, because at that time you are contributing to who makes you or who becomes your leader. And if you do not participate from the beginning, I don't think that you have the right to complain when things don't go wrong. But it is that participation that gives you will I say the right to say, look, I voted for you, you're not working for me, and things like that. And I think Nigerians should consider that. However, I know that there's a declining trust in our institutions and even the election, because people feel that the outcomes don't reflect their will and things like that. And so our hope is that things work in a way that people begin to see that their votes will count. And there's been a lot of progress, whether we like it or not, in terms of we're coming from a long place to where we are now, and I think that people coming out to vote will contribute to making that process better.
So let's talk a bit about, we've talked about INEC, citizens' responsibilities. What should citizens do more? I know you've mentioned some, to be a part of this process, to make it work. I mean, we always say government this, government that. Now it's time for you to come out and vote. So what else how in particular are young people?
So young people need to participate in the process. A lot of old people, let me not use old, perhaps elderly people, have seen Nigeria work. That's the truth. They've gone through a Nigeria that they were pleased with. I mean, and so progressively things have gone down. And when they were that age, they participated. So when I see young people saying, "Oh, there's no hope for Nigeria," I'm like, no, you are re-echoing what you hear older people say.
No, but is that not the reality? In all honesty, do their votes? I mean, a lot of them would say their votes don't count. Do their votes really count? I mean, we're trying to encourage young people,
yeah,
but we also have to be honest.
But when you don't show up, your votes don't
that's
count.
a starting point.
Yes,
to show up.
When you don't show up, you need to show up. And I'll use the area council elections in FCT, because FCT is city center. There are people from everywhere. Even though these elections are not major, but these are the people that are like your local council. And it's very important for you to actually contribute at that level. And one of the polling units by, was it 2:30? Before 2:30, just the policeman and the INEC staff waiting. Maybe only 4 people voted in that polling unit. So now, if you don't look at what is going on, how will your votes count? So you have to be there, protect your votes, and ensure that everything that goes on around the polling environment, you contribute to making it transparent.
So what lessons from the Ekiti election should guide preparation for the future of cycle elections and also the next general elections?
So we have elections in Osun State in August, and if you compare it to Osun State elections, are more competitive than this Ekiti State election. The Ekiti State elections, to an extent, was a one-man race. The governor was running again for the second term. When you go into the city, you don't really see campaign materials of any other party except his own. So just maybe there were 3 major parties contesting that election. Now, when we go to Osun, it's a lot more competitive than what we've just seen. So for us, I think a comprehensive review of the election technology that was used, that's the BVAS machines, to ensure that they work more smoothly in these elections, because then you give reason for doubt if things like that happen. It seems to be a systemic issue if it continues to happen, and I think INEC needs to review that. Secondly, information around certain things. So we also noticed that the ballot paper had 19 political parties, and 14 political parties were contesting for the elections. So although the result sheet had about 15, these discrepancies also create some sort of misinformation, because when the results started coming in, people voted for ABGA because it was on the ballot paper, and ABGA did not present or field a candidate. And I think the REC gave an explanation, the INEC REC, afterwards, that
how do such errors actually happen? I mean, new elections were coming,
yes.
So that's why citizens are like, yeah, they're about to do something, that's why this is happening. They should do better, don't you think so?
I think so. And we're trying to see how we can have a post review with INEC to sort of highlight all of these things personally, as opposed to writing reports and just submitting them, so that they know how critical it is for the next election. So I think that's information as well. And then because of the new Electoral Act, the guidelines and regulations for these elections were released perhaps 2 weeks or so, or 3 weeks before the elections. And of course, they use this to train INEC staff to be able to follow procedure that have now been put in the Electoral Act, and the guidelines are quite elaborate. So I'm hoping that this will be incorporated properly into the Osun State governorship elections, and then citizens can understand. There was this issue about downloadable PVCs, which a lot of people have been talking about. The new act says you can download a PVC when you want to replace missing or lost PVCs, and so I think some political parties were telling their supporters that they could go vote without the PVCs, and I think INEC cleared this in their press statements before the elections that it wasn't going to work for Ekiti. But we got a report or two of some polling units allowing people to vote without PVCs. So, you know, if this is what it is, then I think it should be communicated early enough so that people know that if their PVCs are missing. And because in the real truth, you don't need a PVC. Look at all the what will I call it now, issues around collection and things like that. You can do away with it once you have a name. What happens is that you present your name, it pulls out your information from the beavers, you authenticate with either your fingerprint or your photo. So all of this information, once registered, is in the beavers. So it can be used optimally without having to go through that hassle. And I think if that's the way to go for Osun State elections, then it should be communicated well ahead of time.
So if you have your opportunity and you do to recommend 3 urgent electoral reforms to policymakers, what should they be? 3.
When you mean policymakers, like the legislators, well, early this year we were very, very active. In fact, we mobilized for the protest around the Electoral Act because we wanted mandatory transmission of results. And I think that for me is still on the plate. The reason that I'm saying that is because this is Nigeria. Everything, if not legislated, there can be a loophole around it. And of course, we could see that in Ekiti State elections before 7:30 p.m. more than 85% of the elections were uploaded and the results were announced that day. But this is a small election. When it comes to big nationwide elections, it's always best to have a clear-cut process and procedure to be able to make sure that the elections are transparent. So for me, that's the first. Second, political parties need to do better. So we need to find a way in the law to ensure that, and I'm talking widely now, when you look at the 2027 elections and all the issues around membership, you know, getting tickets for the primaries and all of that. I know that the timeline was sort of abridged because of the movement of elections, but all of us are spectators. We are not, you know, stakeholders in the sense that we're not participating, but we're all spectators. And when all of these things were happening, they could have been following some of these events. But I feel, and anybody can say that it's a different opinion, but I feel personally that the reason why many of them are complaining and jumping ship is because they're just being selfish. So there needs to be, there needs to be a when the act was being proposed in the National Assembly, even members of the opposition were part of the committees working on it. So they saw the trajectory, except they didn't believe that it was going to pass. They saw the trajectory in which there were new provisions, you know, and I would personally say that if I was in the committee, I would know that huge changes were coming. So things like that, we need to think first about Nigeria before we start thinking about,
think first about Nigeria. I mean, that sounds good.
And lastly, of course, I'm all sold up for registering more people. So CVR has been continuous all year round since 2023. However, it cuts off at a certain point for them to be able to print PVCs and things like that. So if we do away with the PVCs and just use your NIN and use an ID card and your registration number, which is the VIN, then we're good to go.
You'll be surprised that many people don't know this information. So, should INEC be doing more in terms of voter education consistently?
Yeah, so INEC has a lot on their plates, to be honest, and they keep complaining about the need to be unbundled. So even on the day Ekiti had election, there were like 6 of other elections replacing either the death of a senator or whatever in different locations, which means they deploy all year round to do elections. So I think, yes, another agency can support when it comes to voter education, and we've been talking about NOA and other stakeholders who can continue to re-echo this. INEC has a limit to which it can do some of these things, and I'm not saying that they have worked optimally, but I think it will be easy for them to say we've done enough because of the several other things that they have to do. And very recently, last week or so, a couple of people called me and said, how far I need trying to register, but every time I go online they are telling me to go to Karu, and then I heard from someone that they were doing in area 10 registration. So I said, okay, go to the area 10 INEC office and try, and let's see if you're able to register there. Then another person was like, we've been here for 3 days. So there are a lot of those complaints, and I think that they can work harder to fix those issues.
What role can civil society organizations play in rebuilding trust, public trust, and encouraging greater participation?
We play a very critical role, and we continue to play that role. A few years ago, if you had asked people what election observation was, they would not know what that is. But these are the things we, in this role as election observers, we go to elections, spot out the good things, the bad things, incorporate it into our advocacy at different levels. And I think the work really is for all of us. So we continue to do ours, radio program, TV, and just generally advocating for better reforms in our elections.
Looking at Nigeria's democracy, are you optimistic about the future of our elections? If yes, why? If no, why not?
No, I am sold out to democracy. That's why I do this work that I do. I keep saying that the worst democracy is still better than military regime. And when I speak to young people about it, I'm like, look, all these things you say on social media, if Nigeria doesn't have a democracy, you won't have the audacity to even say half of them. We don't have the best democracy yet because we're not practicing half of the things that we should practice in a democracy, and I think that's where we should start from. Full implementation in all aspects, then we can now complain that democracy is not working for us.
Thank you very much. Agiampe Onyema, Programs Manager for Elections and Civics at the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, PLAC. Thank you for sharing your insight with us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
And to everyone, thank you so much for joining us on the program, the Civic Forum. Tomorrow we'll be back with another topical conversation. My name is Uche Inogo. Have a lovely morning.